A detective who hunts monsters, a predator hiding behind a college social club, and a system that keeps letting both of them walk free. This is a manga that doesn't flinch. And neither will we.
A girl lay there barely conscious, her body refusing to obey the simplest command while someone aimed a camera directly at her face. Across the room, someone screamed, "Stop!" But nobody moved fast enough to matter. The word just hung there, useless, while the lens kept rolling. When she finally opened her eyes, there was a ceiling fan above her and two strangers laughing at something she couldn't see. She couldn't move. Arms, legs, voice, all of it gone like it had been switched off at the source. And somewhere at the edge of her vision, she heard the cold metallic click of handcuffs being fastened. Back at the part-time job, the so-called justice hero was at it again, lecturing the room like he'd personally been appointed to fix the world. Her co-worker leaned over and whispered the usual logic. "He hasn't done anything to you. There's no harm. Just sit there and let him talk." It was the highest-paying gig available, so they endured it. But something about the whole arrangement sat wrong in a way she couldn't shake. He cupped her face in his hand like she was something fragile, and then he told her exactly what he wanted, to see desperation and hopelessness written all over it. She had nothing left to offer him but the truth, so she said it plainly. "Just kill me." He smiled at that, which was somehow worse than anything else he'd done. He offered everything: royalties, publishing contracts, future earnings, whatever it would take. Tears cutting through the blood on his face as the chainsaw idled nearby. But money wasn't the point, and the man holding it didn't even pretend to consider the offer. Instead, his eyes drifted back to the screen, and his whole expression lit up. "Oh, this is it. My favorite scene." By the first cut, it was difficult, he explained. The meat doesn't give easily at first. But the second and third times, the body starts to cooperate, and after that, it practically does the work for you. When the victim buckled and vomited, the man didn't even pause, just told him to go ahead and get it all out. There was no rush. He asked, almost conversationally, whether his guest knew how many people disappeared every year without a single trace ever found. The answer, of course, was a lot, more than most people want to think about. And nobody, he said with quiet certainty, was going to come looking for this one. The cabin sat in total isolation, no roads visible, no neighbors, no sound except the wind cutting through the trees outside. When the subject of missing persons came up, specifically how long before someone is declared gone for good, the answer was over a year, sometimes forever. The man on the floor just turned a page and smiled, like that was the most reassuring thing he'd heard all day. The Exorcist, a 1973 American supernatural horror film, the only horror movie ever nominated for the Academy Award, played on a screen propped up in what used to be a warehouse. The victim sat bound in a rocking chair, forced to watch, and every time he tried to speak, he was immediately shushed. His captor delivered the film trivia like a tour guide, utterly unbothered by the fact that someone was tied up in his audience. The call came with news that couldn't have been better. Pre-orders were flooding in, a pre-release edition had been locked in, and it was going to be a massive hit. He took it all in stride, walking the streets alone with a hum under his breath and the calm of someone who'd already known how this would go. The real irony, though, was what he said next. The same public screaming about injustice was the one clearing the shelves. There was a crowd outside his building, signs raised, voices raw, every single one of them calling for him to leave and never come back. He stood a street away, mask pulled up, watching it all unfold with the measured stillness of someone taking a mental inventory. Then he made a phone call, and the first thing out of his mouth was a question. "Did you snitch on me?" The train was packed, bodies close, the low hum of a city grinding through another ordinary evening. But inside his head, it was anything but ordinary. He could almost feel it, the weight of two hands around a fragile neck, the sound of something giving way. He stood there in the middle of all those people, eyes gone blank and white, and wanted it more than he'd wanted anything in a very long time. He doubled over, coughing, barely holding himself upright, while across the room someone posed the question with all the steadiness of someone who'd been waiting months to ask it. A formal apology to the victim's family. The reaction hit like a physical blow, raw and unfiltered, part disbelief, part something closer to rage. Then came two broken sounds from somewhere deep in his chest that might have been words, or might have been the beginning of a breakdown. Over dinner, an otherwise unremarkable meal, he described the first time in careful detail, how difficult it was to push through, how the resistance surprised him, how much easier it became after that second or third attempt. He was giggling while he said it, knife still in hand, leaning close enough to be intimate about it. On the plate between them sat a bone, and neither man acknowledged it for what it was. He sat in front of the cameras and told the world he wanted to apologize, specifically to those dead girls, the ones who couldn't hear him anymore. He talked about second chances and the mercy of a system that gave him his life back, voice cracking just enough to read as genuine. And somewhere in the studio, someone actually cried, while he folded his hands in his lap and called this his redemption. 20 years ago, 2 little girls, ages 3 and 4, were murdered in what the news anchor called a cruel and heartless crime. The killer dismembered their bodies and sent the remains directly to the families, which crossed a line that even hardened investigators struggled to process out loud. The case shook the country, and in a quiet corner of a police building, someone very sharp began paying close attention. In the 1st Division office, a voice cut through the usual noise to announce that a special program was airing, and nobody knew what it was yet. Officers filtered toward the television in ones and twos, the normal rhythm of the afternoon grinding to a halt. Whatever was on that screen was clearly about to matter. 2 officers had peeled off from the group, quietly agreeing that without one particular detective's instincts, the whole department would have been publicly humiliated over the case. Someone mentioned almost as an aside that he was also good-looking and easy to be around, which prompted the real revelation. His father was the former police superintendent general. That explained the trajectory, at least. 20 years later, a superintendent's award ceremony, formal, clean, unremarkable in all the ways that matter, and one man standing at the front of the room collecting recognition for cracking the South Kanto serial woman assault case. His name was Hiroki Dan, Investigation Unit Division 1, and he carried the calm of someone who'd long since stopped being surprised by what people are capable of. This was a celebration, but something in his expression made it look more like the beginning of something he hadn't told anyone about yet. In a dark room that smelled like it hadn't been opened in weeks, a young man sat on the floor playing a video game like there was nothing else in the world. A fly landed directly on his face, and he didn't flinch, just dragged his tongue across it without looking away from the screen. Then the controller slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor, and the room went very, very still. The room was chaos. One of the men showing off something disgusting while the others laughed, and the girl on the floor just stared at the ceiling, saying nothing. Someone made a comment about her being lucky, which landed like a punch in a room that had already crossed every line. Then a single voice cut through all of it. "Are you all idiots?" At the precinct, the word had already gotten around. The Butcher Courier book had been quietly cancelled before it ever hit shelves. Public backlash was the official reason, the kind of pressure that makes publishers vanish a project overnight without a statement. Dan just pressed the button on the vending machine and said nothing, but something was already turning behind his eyes. He was out on the rooftop on his break, pretending to be fine, when she found him and asked the question he'd been avoiding all morning. His hobby was pottery, he explained. He'd miscalculated the mixture on his latest mug, and the result wasn't what he wanted. It was such a small human thing to say that she didn't quite know what to do with it. She couldn't hide it, he told her plainly. Anger, sadness, all of it right there on the surface for anyone paying attention. She admitted she couldn't fool him, and then finally said what she'd been carrying. A report had come in from a 21-year-old junior college student. Something had happened, and the case was already looking like everything Dan hated most about his job. The report was straightforward on paper. A drinking party hosted by a university student, private, casual, the kind that happens every weekend in every city. Someone suggested a batsu game. Loser drinks a glass of beer. The usual social pressure wrapped in a joke. She lost. The glass was put in front of her, and that was the last thing she remembered clearly. The 3 men sent the other 2 girls home in their own taxi, and then put Yasuno in a different one, all 3 of them climbing in with her. The driver was told to go to the usual place, like it was a standing reservation. Nobody said anything else out loud that needed saying. 1 month later, she woke up abandoned in an alley near the station with no memory of the hours between the taxi and the concrete beneath her. She did everything right. The hospital, the rape kit, the formal police report, every terrifying step of it done while her hands were probably shaking. But the test results came back clean for STDs and pregnancy, which was the only piece of luck anyone could find in any of this. The men denied everything, of course, and the evidence was almost nothing. Just her word, her body, and the gap where her memory used to be. The trauma, Dan's colleague said with a weight she couldn't quite keep out of her voice, will never fully heal. Standing above the city with that truth between them, Dan heard himself say that he felt completely hopeless. She thanked him for the offer and told him she meant it. If he could help, she wanted that help. But the way his jaw moved when she walked away, just the smallest twitch, said that something about this case was already personal in a way he wasn't ready to name yet. He stood there watching her go, and the city stretched out below him like it had no idea what was about to happen. The man who showed up at the cafe and handed Yasuno a folder across the table introduced himself as attorney Akira Maruyama. He smiled the kind of smile that people practice in mirrors, pushed the folder toward her with, "Please take this," and waited. She trembled, and the folder sat between them like something alive. He laid it out without ceremony. Drop the charges, take the money, move on. She said no, hard, immediate, final. And he just smiled wider, like no was something he'd heard before and found endearing. Then he told her she should accept the agreement or else, and waited to see if the or else was enough. She asked what would happen if she didn't comply, and the answer was already on his laptop. Footage, he said, that proved she had given consent. He'd submit it to the police himself to counter her report. He leaned back with his drink like he'd just ordered dessert, and she sat across from him with nowhere left to go. She pushed the table back and stood, which sent the folder and everything on it scattering to the floor. "Look here, miss." He said it with the patience of a man who does this for a living. If she insisted she'd been assaulted, he would submit the footage. The room around them stayed completely ordinary, which made it somehow worse. He slid the drink toward her and spelled it out one more time. A lot of people would see the footage if she forced his hand, and she should be grateful she got paid just for having sex. She sat across from him with her chin resting on her hand, eyes down, processing what it means when the law sends someone like this to finish what 3 men started. Episode 2 ended there, without resolution, without rescue, without anything except her face and what was written on it. Across town, a 19-year-old named Aoyama Taichi stood in front of an ATM screen reading student bank loan and hit withdraw with a breath that sounded like he was making a decision he'd regret. The cash came out, and he stared at it in his hand under the lights of the city, the night busy and indifferent around him. At a club somewhere far too expensive for anyone using a student bank loan, 21-year-old Izawa Teru accepted his membership fee receipt and poured champagne down a tower of glasses while people cheered like he'd done something worthy of worship. The room called him supreme, called him ace, and he smiled the smile of someone who had never once asked where the money came from. This was the world Aoyama's borrowed cash was buying him entry into. The night at the restaurant started innocently enough. A mixed group, good food, the easy noise of people who think nothing bad can happen to them yet. When Yasuno said she didn't drink, the response was immediate. "Just 1 glass. Come on, it's punishment time." The 2 men at the table watched her with smiles that had something underneath them she couldn't read fast enough. The drinks kept coming. The girls got louder. The men got quieter in the specific way that means they're watching and waiting. The other 2 girls laughed through it, unaware, while Yasuno sat with a growing unease she couldn't name in a room full of people who looked perfectly safe. By the time the cheers started fading and the night wound down, the trap had already closed. The girls were all too drunk to remember the exact sequence of events. Who left when? Which taxi went where? How much time passed between the restaurant and the street? 3 men, 1 girl, a different cab, and a destination they already knew. The camera from episode 2 had captured all of it, and somewhere out there, Attorney Maruyama had the file saved, ready, and was about to make sure Yasuno never forgot that someone always has the footage. He met Teru-san 6 months ago. That much he knew. Just a few weeks into college, and the world had already split itself into 2 very clear halves, and he could already tell which one he'd landed in. Someone asked if they could sit with him at lunch, and he had no answer for that either. He'd worked hard enough to get into an elite university, genuinely believing that would be the turning point, but nothing changed. He was still a virgin, still looked down on, still treated like an idiot by people who hadn't earned the right to. He'd been wrong about what the school gates actually opened. Then someone walked up to him on campus and said, "Hey you, do you want to change yourself?" Teru told him plainly that if he didn't, he'd spend the rest of his life exactly like this. The words landed somewhere they shouldn't have. The MOT seminar filled a whole auditorium. A room full of young men who all thought the same thing about themselves. Ikawaki stood at the front and told them the world had exactly 2 types of people, elites and lowlifes, and a prestigious degree didn't move you between them. The only thing that did, he said, was confidence. Join MOT and you'll be an elite. You'll learn how to get women, how to move through the world like someone who belongs at the top of it. The audience leaned forward as one, and Aoyama leaned with them. "You can be Superman," Teru said. "All the women fall head over heels. All the doors open. All of it yours if you just build the confidence to take it." MOT was one of the largest circles at the university. The photos showed barbecues and Halloween parties and groups of laughing people. From the outside, it looked like exactly what he'd been missing. The structure was clear. Ikawaki at the top as emperor, executives called aristocrats below him, and general members as citizens at the bottom. The membership fee was 10,000 yen. Yearly dues, 53,000. Steep, but he told himself he'd try the trial first and quit if it wasn't working. He stared at the pamphlet and asked himself if someone like him could really change. The first real event was a BBQ. Groups photos, sunshine, everyone smiling for the official blog. It looked normal enough that the discomfort he felt watching it from the edges took a while to name. Then Teru put his arm around him and said it was getting seriously hot. Teru leaned close and asked if he was bored being alone in the dark. Then told him the motto of MOT, share everything for fun. He was invited in, welcomed, made to feel like part of something that wanted him specifically. He was moved, and he became a loyal follower, which is exactly what Teru had planned. Later, in a room that looked nothing like a social event anymore, Teru smiled and explained that the girl couldn't tell which of the men she'd been with. Wasn't that convenient? Aoyama-chan had been a top pitcher, apparently. Teru had mentioned it to someone. Is that how you see me then? Aoyama said it quietly, and nobody answered. The camera was already rolling when Teru told him he'd agreed just now, and to come over. The directions came smoothly, without anger. Clinical almost, like a lesson being taught to a student who hadn't learned to say no yet. The number count was already on. 1, 2, 3. Back in the club lounge, Teru complimented Aoyama's new haircut and asked if it was from the salon he'd recommended. The room cheered when Teru called everyone to gather for Aoyama, and for a moment it felt like being celebrated. He'd paid 53,000 yen for the right to stand in that room and feel like he existed. Walking her home at night, he took her hand, and something in his head told him holding hands meant the next step was already approved. She jumped back, startled. He apologized and asked if she didn't like it. She said no, she was just surprised. And the gap between those two things was everything. When he finally said he wanted to leave MOT, the response was quiet shock. I'm shocked you said that, Aoyama-chan. He told someone he liked this person, that he wanted a real relationship, that he wanted out. It was the most honest thing he'd said since he joined. In the room with the others, he said it out loud. I can't do it. I can't force her. I want out. He offered 13,000 yen to leave, and someone assured him it was just a game they'd all played together, not what he was making it out to be. Then came the final offer. Keep quiet about the forcing game, and everything stays between them. Ikawaki's face filled the frame. Glasses glinting, smile completely still, and he said simply, we share everything just for fun, won't you? The city sat dark and quiet behind the rooftops, completely unaware. Episode 3 ended there, and the silence it left behind was the loudest thing on the page. Episode 4 opened at night in a quiet cafe, the city glowing through the glass, and someone asked Yasuno directly, you want me to withdraw the rape charges? She said she didn't want to do it anymore, not any of it. But before she could finish, a quiet voice said her name. She was crying by then, telling them she didn't want to go through those painful memories again, that she just wanted to forget, and to be left alone to do it. Someone called out wait as she walked toward the door. She kept walking. Dan and his colleague laid out what they'd found. Multiple similar cases, and every woman who had gone as far as filing against Iwaki had quietly withdrawn. Teru's father ran a major corporation and had serious political connections, and had hired a dedicated lawyer, specifically to protect his son. The short version, his colleague said, was that he'd simply spoiled the boy too much. Meanwhile, somewhere else entirely, a camera was pointed, and the count game was already underway. The numbers ticking up, the room dark, Aoyama frozen in the middle of it. Someone called his name with a smile that had no warmth in it at all. Whatever line he thought he'd drawn for himself, he was already on the wrong side of it. Ikawaki leaned close to Aoyama and made it simple. The video stays offline if he behaves, and he already knows what happens if he doesn't. 7 times. Someone announced it like a score, and the room cheered. Aoyama said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Word spread through the street that night. A young woman had tried to jump from a building, and the ambulance cut through the crowd with lights going. Nobody in the cluster of onlookers knew her name. The stretcher disappeared around a corner, and the crowd stood there not knowing what to do with what they'd just seen. In the living room, someone yelled pause it and lunged for the remote. Ikawaki sat back and told the attorney he needed the rape charges handled again, the usual way, and added that he owed the man everything. The attorney laughed. On screen, something was frozen mid-frame that nobody should have been watching in the first place. The membership fees had all been collected for the month. The door left unlocked, and then the phone buzzed. Someone leaned over and said, "Oh ho, you've got a call from a woman," but Ikawaki looked at the screen and frowned. It was an email from someone saved as Dan. The message just said, "Come out to the balcony." He stood there staring at it, wondering how this person had his number at all. And then from somewhere below came a sound that wasn't a question. He stepped toward the window, and whatever was out there announced itself before he could decide whether to look. Something came through the window fast, and someone hit the floor. Between gasping breaths came the words, "There's a crazy guy with an axe." Ikawaki picked up the book on the table and just stood there. He told the man on the floor to run before the axe guy got there. Almost helpful, almost concerned, almost human. He tried calling the police and couldn't get through. He smiled at his phone like that was the punchline to a joke he'd already figured out, and said that's dangerous to nobody in particular. Whatever was coming hadn't arrived yet, and he was still calm enough to find it interesting. He woke up somewhere he didn't recognize, handcuffed to a bed frame, with no memory of the gap between the balcony and the ceiling above him. The cuffs clinked against the metal when he moved, and the room gave him nothing. No windows he could see, no explanation, no one visible yet. He asked where he was and what this was, and the silence answered first. Then, someone stepped forward holding a cross, ornate, spiked, the kind that appears in a specific scene from a specific 1973 film, and asked, completely pleasantly, if he knew what it was. Ikawaki said he had no idea what they were talking about. The person smiled like that was exactly the right answer to start with. The cafe was quiet on Ryo's side of the table when she laid it out. Aoyama had been arrested and confessed to everything. Every wrong thing Ikawaki and MOT had done. All of it. 4 bodies had been found in one of Ikawaki's properties, and Ikawaki himself was still missing, with the Metropolitan Police working the case around the clock. Ryo told Yasuno that whenever she needed someone to talk to, she'd be there. Yasuno said her name quietly, Ryo-san, and thanked her, and the two of them sat in front of a big afternoon window while the city carried on without caring about any of it. It was a small moment, but it was real, which made it the rarest thing in this whole story. The news anchor covered it all in sequence. The Metropolitan Police had opened a formal investigation into the MOT rape cases after Aoyama's statement. 4 bodies had been discovered in one of Ikawaki's apartment buildings, and the university was holding a press conference. The ticker at the bottom read, "Apartment Murder Spree." Yasuno watched it from a hospital bed and said nothing. She told someone she was fine. She was just fine, but she wasn't fine. She said she had to get well soon because there was someone she wanted to see. The city stretched out beyond the window, indifferent and enormous, and the empty bed beside hers hadn't moved at all. Breaking news. A man had attacked civilians with a blade at a shopping complex in Minato district, and several people were dead. Police swarmed the scene, and a 20-year-old had been arrested on murder charges while the crowd pressed against the barriers screaming, "Step back." A journalist named Masaharu Onizuka crouched down next to a child at the scene and asked, smiling, if they'd seen a lot of blood, if their mother had been being stabbed to death. How did they feel right now? A hand shot out and shoved him back. It belonged to Metropolitan Police Division 1's Mamiya Ryo, and she was not asking nicely. She put herself between Onizuka and the child and asked if he was family. He told her it was his job as a journalist to hear the voice of the victims, and she let that statement do exactly what it deserved to do in the space between them. The child stood there in the middle of all of it, not yet knowing what any of it meant. Outside an apartment building, the same journalist was already at the door, shouting at the intercom that the son had committed a crime at a shopping mall today, that he'd be there until he got his interview. The person inside said nothing. Onizuka told the silence it wasn't going to work, that the neighborhood already knew, that staying quiet made it worse. The door opened a crack, and a woman's voice begged him to stop, to please come inside, to stop bothering the neighbors. He said it louder. "Your son killed 12 people. Some of them were small children." The crack in the door held steady for a moment. Then it opened all the way and let him in, which was worse than if it had stayed shut. Inside, he held a recorder up and asked how the abuse had happened, and the person on the floor said, "I'm sorry," over and over again, the words landing nowhere. A taller figure stood in the doorway watching, arms at his sides, expression unreadable, while "I'm sorry" kept coming from below, like it could eventually mean something if said enough times. The neighbors had apparently confirmed it. The son became who he became because the abuse never stopped. And now 12 people were dead and the father was on the floor and the journalist was recording all of it. "Do you have something to say to the victims and their families?" he asked. And the man on the floor kept saying sorry, the only word he had left. And somewhere out there, Ikawaki was still missing, Ryo was still hunting, and the story was nowhere near over. But the man doesn't flinch. He watches the girl rush to her mother's side, watches the door slam in his face, and doesn't move an inch. Something about this family has his full attention, and it's not going away. Back in the car, his partner finally says it. He went too far. The man just lights a cigarette and stares out the window. He'll come back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until someone's ready to talk. His partner doesn't understand yet, but the man already has a theory, and he's not letting it go until someone answers for it. 2 men, 1 car, 1 very dangerous conversation. The driver exhales smoke and asks the question that's been burning under everything. Why can't the criminal's parents be held accountable? They raised him. They're the root of all this. His partner goes quiet, because that question isn't just philosophical. It sounds like a plan, and whoever they're targeting next, they're already circling. A girl sits alone at what looks like a cremation hall, a framed photo of her mother resting beside her. She speaks quietly to the photo, because her brother committed mass murder, became a criminal, and now their entire family is paying for it. Why is it their fault? They didn't ask for any of this. She grips her uniform jacket and stares at the photo with hollow eyes. The grief isn't loud. It's the kind that's already past crying. She's not mourning. She's surviving. Then the cameras come. A wall of press, lenses aimed at her like weapons, everyone shouting at once. Can you answer our questions? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? She stands there and her face cracks. Not in tears, but in something closer to a breaking point. They don't see a grieving girl. They see a story. And somewhere behind her eyes, something shifts. Something that's done being a victim. Juliet Private High School. A new setting. A new uniform. Same relentless world. Arisu Onizuka, 17 years old, sits in class while her classmates gossip loudly about the mass murder incident, about the criminal sister who apparently tried to take her own life. They call her a poor thing. Then someone shrugs and says it's her decision whether she wants to live or die. Arisu doesn't say a word. She just exists in the middle of it, invisible to them, because they have no idea who she is yet. In the school bathroom, someone's being forced to the ground. Water gets thrown in their face, and a girl's voice cuts through. You smell. You stink. Another calls for a mop. It's not a fight. It's a performance of cruelty, deliberate and practiced. But the person on the ground isn't another student. It's a man in a dress shirt and tie. It's a teacher. The teacher, glasses, slim build, stands cornered near the bathroom stalls while Arisu grabs him by the tie and looks him dead in the eye. She tells him he needs to be punished. She tells him to take off his pants. Another girl watching from the side calls him a wussy for not standing up straight. He doesn't fight back. He just stands there, frozen, because somewhere along the way, the power in this school flipped entirely upside down. But Arisu goes too far, and she knows exactly what she's doing. She says it herself. This is corporal punishment. I'll report you. The word spreads through the hallways like a rumor on fire. Punishment, punishment, punishment. The school gates loom in the background, and then the sign on the door, principal's office. Whatever Arisu started in that bathroom, it just went official. Inside that office, the air is thick. A parent, voice tight with barely contained fury, tells the principal that the teacher doesn't understand how his actions could hurt their daughter. The accusation lands hard. And then the demand, dismiss him from this school. The principal scrambles to keep the peace. The teacher stammers something that doesn't even form into words. The room is collapsing around him, and he hasn't even had a chance to explain his side. Because here's the thing, whatever really happened in that bathroom, Arisu Onizuka is 17 years old, the sister of a mass murderer, a girl the whole world decided was guilty by blood, and she just walked into a principal's office with a parent demanding justice on her behalf. Whether she's the victim or the one who set the trap, nobody in that room seems to know anymore. The teacher's mouth opens. Something's coming, and whatever he says next could either save him or seal the story that Arisu's already written for him.